This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack, answering your most pressing financial questions, including how to track recurring subscriptions. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. What happens when an individual manager says, well, wait a second, I'm an agent boss now? That's a phrase Microsoft is using.
Yes.
Could there be a risk that would just lead to this sort of individual mentality? Like, I'm the one human overseeing this fleet of bots. And so therefore, I don't really have to interact with the other humans on my team. I can just sort of take it on my own.
That would be a danger. And are you just going to be the boss of agents, or is a boss of you going to be an agent at some point?
Right.
I think that's not far away.
Who's the overlord now?
Who is the overlord now? Exactly.
Welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. My guest today is Sabina Nawaz. She is an executive coach and a former Microsoft leader who now advises C-suite executives around the world. Her book, You're the Boss, offers a provocative core idea that it's not the power that corrupts leaders, it's the pressure. And that pressure, in some ways and in some cases, is only getting worse as AI tools reshape workflows and the middle layer of management disappears or shrinks at companies including Microsoft and Amazon. We'll talk about how managers can stay effective when they're suddenly more responsible for more people with fewer resources and a flood of new technology that makes them feel like they should be doing everything themselves. Sabina, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Todd. It's wonderful being here in your beautiful office.
Thanks. So one of the things I want to talk with you about later on is that you worked directly with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer at Microsoft on executive succession and issues related to that, just as a teaser for the folks who are listening. But let's just start by getting the basics on You're the Boss. I'm in the midst of it right now. For people who have not gotten a chance to dive into it, what is the core thesis and what was the reason that you chose to write this book?
We could take up the whole conversation on that, but the three things that are really main points in the book, Todd, one is that being promoted is the riskiest time of your career. It is not power that corrupts, but pressure. Pressure is this silent corruptor. It affects everyone. It's everywhere and constant. And it doesn't just stress us out, it changes how we act. And if pressure is the silent corruptor, power is the great divider. It isolates us. The room shifts once we gain power and authority. It changes how people see us, and it changes how we see them. It clouds the effect our behavior under pressure is having on others. So we are often the last ones to find out how our behavior has corrupted our actions and impacted other people.
One of the things that I love about the book is the anecdotes. And there was one anecdote to your point of people who are suddenly placed into the role of managers, not necessarily understanding how they're perceived and how people might not be speaking truth to power. Was the man who was standing up and speaking at an event and said, I don't need a mic, everybody can hear me. And I've been in that exact situation where I've been in the audience and I wasn't in a position to say anything, but it really resonated with me because he couldn't be heard.
Yes.
And no one wanted to tell him until he had one person who was there basically for that reason. But it was a small thing, but I thought it was really symbolic and representative of the larger challenge that leaders face in not hearing the truth because people aren't speaking it to them.
Well, think about it. In that case, it is such a small thing, and it actually will make him be clearer. And yet, when he asks, not only do people not say it, they lie. They say you're fine.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine how much truth he's getting when the stakes are higher.
Right.
You asked also what made me write this book.
Yes.
And I can give you the logical answer, which is 12,000 pages of data that I had amassed after over 1,000 interviews from coworkers who give feedback on what's it like to actually work for this boss.
This is a 360 interview.
This is called a 360 interview, exactly. So I interview about a dozen people to get that feedback for each of my clients. And over the years, I had amassed all this data and I analyzed it. The other answer, though, is that I was a lousy boss at Microsoft. And that wasn't always the case, which is what's so interesting. Because when I first started and I ran software development teams, Windows, Internet Explorer, MSN, and a bunch of version 0 products that went nowhere. We worked on the very first sound system in computers. I'm dating myself here. But on my engineering teams, my people told me I was the best boss they'd ever had. I cared about them. I coached them. Those were great years. And then everything changed. I was running Microsoft's management development. And the first day after parental leave, I'm putting on lipstick for the first time in 5 months. My assistant, Lori, calls me frantic. Where are you? Steve expects you in 30 minutes.
That's Steve.
That's Steve. The CEO of the company is Steve. And so Lori's reading me the memo I'm supposed to discuss with Steve Ballmer as I'm hitting warp speed on 520 interchange on the on-ramp, getting to work. And that set the pace and tone for my return to work. Inbox overflowing, calendar packed, infant at home, no sleep, no peace, no patience. And overnight, I morphed from being caring and nurturing to snippy and short. Still 5'2" short, but now also short-tempered, rushing to meet deadlines I micromanaged, worried about timing. I told myself I don't have time to provide detailed instructions, let alone repeat them. There'll be time for empathy later on. When someone would come to my office, I'd turn sideways with all 10 fingers on the keyboard, indicating I'm very busy. You're less important than me. Spit it out, move on. And the hard part of this was, the scary part of this was that I thought I was being efficient until my colleague Joe stops by. And Joe says, "Did you know that Zach is crying in his office because of what you said?" And my whole body turns hot with shame. Now my hands are not on the keyboard, but I can't make eye contact with Joe because I'm so ashamed. And I think, how did I get to this? From caring and nurturing to somebody that people apparently are afraid of and really don't like. And that's why I wrote this book. Because the same person can be the best boss ever and the boss from hell under pressure. Who here isn't under pressure these days? The higher we rise, the more pressure on our shoulders. So I have a lot of empathy for bosses. I've been there. And I know that when you manage pressure well, just like it turns coal into diamonds, pressure doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. So let's be mindful about it. And then I have these tools through my coaching clients, which are road tested. And we can immediately put them into action. We don't have to study emotional intelligence for a dozen years, though it's wonderful. I recommend doing that over the long term. You don't have to get a personality transplant. You just have to have the courage to start taking some action.
We've seen a trend in the industry over the past couple of years, and it started perhaps most noticeably with Amazon and Andy Jassy talking about his concerns about the company becoming less nimble because they have so many layers of management that have come up through the pandemic and post Jeff Bezos at Amazon. And most recently, Amy Hood was talking about this, Microsoft's chief financial officer, on their earnings call about one of the reasons why Microsoft ended up making job cuts was to look at the middle management layer. And I'm curious, how are you seeing this play out in terms of that pressure on managers with the rise of AI? I know this is a big question, but I'd love to just get your general thoughts from your own observations and from your work with the executives that you coach.
It is so pervasive. It's not just Amazon or Microsoft, where companies are looking to streamline and to cut out many layers of management. As a result, a few things are happening. Of course, if you manage the old way, you're going to get insurmountable levels of pressure, and it's just not going to scale. It's going to fall apart. Burnout is real. Not just the manager, but the people that they manage, because they're going to act out under that pressure. So what does it mean to manage differently in this day and age?
And what is the old way?
Yeah. Well, so some of the old way is assuming that what I call the sole provider in my book, assuming that I am the sole holder of answers or doing things the best way possible, the fastest way possible, and or the sole rescuer of my people. How often have managers said, I need to protect my team. I need to shield them from things. I need to take care of this myself because they're especially busy this time of year. When is it not an especially busy time of year?
Right.
So it's time to start treating your workforce as adults, as highly capable, fully functioning adults. In fact, some of these were your peers who are no longer managers and now individual contributors. The fulcrum of power and ownership needs to shift from positional to people.
What does that mean?
So it needs to shift from people who have the title of manager to all the people who are responsible for the work, the entire team. What if instead of you running staff meetings, and I see this with a lot of staff meetings, which are not even necessary in some cases, where the manager is constantly asking people, what should the agenda items be? They receive crickets. And then the manager comes up with items every time, and then they're running the meeting. They're working harder than anybody else around. And everybody else is basically checked out on Teams or email or what have you, and they get animated only when their particular piece comes up. So that's not really a team, that's a group of individuals. This might be the time to really formulate teams. Teams as in where people are truly dependent on each other. And that happens when managers stop doing so much and start to allow others' voices to show up.
It's so interesting because you do have this whole notion of agents, and Microsoft, in fact, it really struck me. What's the name? It's not Active Directory anymore. It's Entra ID inside Microsoft. They at Build announced that they were going to start registering agents for their enterprise clients, or their enterprise clients are going to be able to register AI agents in their Entra ID system, much as you would humans.
Yes.
And so that it changes them. It was symbolic to me of this
Yes.
shift that we're seeing.
Yes.
So, but what happens when an individual manager says, well, wait a second, I'm an agent boss now? That's a phrase Microsoft is
Yes.
using.
Yes.
Could there be a risk that would just lead to this sort of individual mentality? Like, I'm the one human overseeing this fleet of bots. And so therefore I don't really have to interact with the other humans on my team. I can just sort of take it on my own. That would be kind of the tendency, I would imagine, of some overachievers who are named to be leaders.
Yeah, that would be a danger. That would be a danger. And are you just going to be the boss of agents, or is a boss of you going to be an agent at some point?
Right.
I think that's not far away. If
Who's the overlord now?
who is the overlord now? Exactly. So how would you want to be treated? And how are you training those bots
Yes.
to be treated?
Yes.
Because maybe you're training your future boss.
It's funny, Bill Gates made a joke about that when they talked about the future of Microsoft CEOs and how there would need to be at least 3 or 4 or something like that in the future. And he made a joke about Copilot being the future Microsoft CEO.
There you go. There you go.
But it just does seem like it's just a different world out there.
Yes.
And are you hearing this from the people that you coach?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
How are they dealing with it, or how are they thinking about it? Or is it still too early to really tell?
It's too early, and it's also too late in some strange ways, because it's too early as in we don't see it yet, but things are going truly at an exponential rate. And so when things come upon us, they go, oh, how did this happen so fast? The time is now. The time was actually, well, before now, to start thinking through this and working through it in a way that makes sense. Right now, there's a common refrain with the layoffs, with management ranks being thinned, that we are being asked to do more with less.
Yeah.
This is such a common phrase I hear right now from just about everybody. And I pose this question to them, is it really doing more with less? Because what you're truly doing is you're trading human headcount for compute power. So you're getting something on the other side of the scale, but you're considering only your human resources as resources. Right. So I think people haven't yet fully made the leap to that. Maybe there are some technological pieces too that need that leap before we can get to doing more with more or more with the same. But our mindset certainly is, one of scarcity, that it's about more with less.
You talk about that in the book, the difference between the scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset.
Right.
And that seems to be the big difference, or one of the big differences, between individual contributors who become managers and succeed and those who become managers and just stick to their old habits. Can you explain the difference between those two things as they relate to management?
Yeah, between scarcity mindset and abundance.
Yes.
When we become managers for the first time from individual contributorship, and I'll be curious to hear your experiences if you're willing to share, Todd, as well, it's scary. It's scary for a number of reasons. One is we're not trained to be managers. We're trained to be whatever craft we were practicing in our individual contributor role. So suddenly it's like, well, am I going to fail at this? How am I going to do well? What's going to happen? So what do I do instead? I start clinging to what I already know how to do. And when I do that, I create scarcity for those around me because now it's their job and I'm overcrowding the space. I'm taking over. I'm depriving them of visibility. I'm depriving them of learning opportunities and growth. And before we know it, now I'm complaining that they're always waiting for the answer from me and nobody shows initiative without realizing that I have actually trained them to do that. So I've created this scarcity of creativity, of resources, because I've held on tight to this the individual contributor work, because there's not enough work in my life otherwise, or I'll be found out, or whatever other story I make.
Or not enough glory.
Or not enough
like
glory.
I used to get when I was...
Exactly. Well, there is a satisfaction of being able to check something off a list, to be able to show something concrete, to have data that says, I did this and look, I wrote this many lines of code, or I dealt with this, triage this many patients. When I'm a supervisor, I still have that data, but that's because my team did that work. So what's my value add? And particularly at this moment in time, when we're talking about the great unbossing, how is that going to get to an abundance mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset? Abundance mindset meaning I am enough. What I'm doing is actually contributing to the success of this organization.
There's enough credit to go around.
There's enough credit to go around.
I don't have to worry about my team overshadowing me because
Yes.
I'm here empowering them,
Yes.
not taking the thunder away from them. That's
Yes.
what I took from the book.
Yes. And when they look good, I look good. Now, we all say that, but it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing when we're faced with threat, we tend to go into that smaller mindset, that scarcity mindset, that self-preservation mode.
And I keep going back to this, but you've got these twin trends. You've got the AI, which empowers people to take on that scarcity mindset, at least in terms of
Yes.
drilling down and doing things themselves.
Yes.
And then you've also got this thinning of the management ranks. The great unbossing. I forgot about that phrase. It's a great phrase.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like a wake-up call. In that way, your book is really a wake-up call. And I know you didn't write it necessarily with this moment in mind.
Exactly.
It came
But
out
here
in
we
March.
are.
Yeah. And
Yes.
but here we are, and this is going on. So you have in the book a series of techniques and tools that you offer managers to avoid some of these pitfalls. So I want to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back.
I'm Brian Westbrook with GeekWire Studios. On this episode of Money Hacks presented by BECU, we chat with Stacy Black, BECU lead financial educator, and answer your financial questions. Stacy, one of the questions that came up is managing miscellaneous expenses. You have a tip specifically for streaming services.
I go through and list all my subscriptions, streaming services. I take a look at my bank account and see what's coming out and make sure I remember everything, or my credit card statement, and list them all out and the amounts. Then you want to evaluate what you're really using. I'm not using all of the streaming services. And in fact, I forgot about one that I signed up for, right? So this is going to give us a clear accounting of what we have and what we're using.
This is a great idea to save money on those miscellaneous expenses. We'll also talk about living paycheck to paycheck, how to buy a home, and whether your financial plan is working for you. Take a look at all of the episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU.
Find more information at becu.org. Welcome back. My guest today is Sabina Nawaz. She is the author of the new book, You're the Boss. She's an executive coach and a former Microsoft engineering leader. That's one of the things that I really like about the book is you can tell. You can
How
just
can
kind
you
of tell.
tell?
You can just tell the engineering mindset. It's refreshing in that, to your point earlier on some of the anecdotes you were telling about your own management struggles, like it's very candid. So in that way, it's not necessarily the typical engineering book, but it's also very methodical and solution oriented and very actionable.
And I use terms like numerator.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. No, this is a management book written by an engineer. And I mean that in the best way. Okay. So you, as we were just discussing in the book, offer a series of techniques. And one of them actually relates to an interesting anecdote from your own life, and that is micro habits. Tell me about those.
Well, like an engineer, now that you primed me with that, Todd, let's talk about definition.
Yes.
2 parts to the word, micro and habit. In other words, it has to be teeny, teeny, tiny, and it's a habit, so it has to be done every single day.
And when you say teeny, teeny, tiny, you explain in the book, like, if you think it's small, it's probably not small enough. So
exactly.
Explain what you mean.
It has to be so small because, would you consider yourself somebody who's an overachiever or somebody who wants to produce fantastic results?
Sure, I aspire to those things. I'll
Great,
say.
exactly.
Yes.
So when we aspire to those things, like the readers of this book, like my clients, we want to take on things with the zeal of New Year's Day. And of course, like New Year's resolutions, they fizzle and we forget about them in a month at most. So the way to overachieve with micro habits is to underachieve. And you've hit the micro habit. I know a client has hit a micro habit when we brainstorm, when they have this laugh, like, come on, it can't be that small. I'm like, bingo, now you've got there. So when they say, I need to be a better listener. Okay, I'm going to paraphrase at every single meeting, and I'm not going to bring my phone to every single meeting. And I'm like, wrong. That's going to last about 1 meeting. And then you're going to get too antsy because you cannot go from 0 to 60 instantly. And so it just defies the laws of physics. It defies the laws of habit. And so what happens is we start to fail at it. And when we start to fail at it, we don't want to do it anymore. And it gets relegated. If you do it so ridiculously small that it's easier to do it than to not do it, you're going to succeed. Next day, you're excited because you did it. So you're going to do it again. So here's an example. For 20 years, I fantasized about being a runner. And I never got there because my goal was always high. I've got to run 5 miles or I've got to go for 30 minutes. And finally, I thought, what about starting really, really, really small? This was a point in my life where I could not even run a mile. In fact, my sons and husband and I would go run around this little pond. And they were, of course, much faster than me as well. Whenever they would turn back, I'd start running. And then when they would not look, I would walk because I couldn't run for long enough. So I thought, okay, 0.1 miles. 0.1 miles. That's
a tenth of a mile.
Yes, exactly. And so that's what I did. And I incremented things. I would do that. So if I say I was running 1.1 miles, for 3 weeks, I would run 1.1 miles and then go to 1.2. So not only tiny increments, but tiny increments over a very long period of time. Long story short, 3 years later, from that 0.1 miles and couldn't run a mile, I completed my first marathon, 26.2 miles, 3 weeks ago. And that was only because of micro habits. It would not have happened otherwise.
So first off, congrats that you finished that.
Thank you.
But going back to the habit that you were talking about earlier with the executive that you were coaching and the listening in the meeting.
Yes.
Like just as an
What's
example,
a micro habit?
What would be a micro habit in that context?
Yeah. One micro habit would be put your phone away in your purse, backpack, whatever it is, for the first 60 seconds of a meeting. So don't come into the meeting with your phone in your hands. That's it. After 60 seconds, feel free to pull it out. Or you find a yearning for it after 60 seconds, don't deprive yourself. So that would be the micro habit that you're device free, because that's the thing that, let's say in their case, is most getting in the way of listening. Let's say another thing that's getting in the way of listening is that they tend to interrupt and speak too much. They suck up all the oxygen in the room. exercise what I call your shut up muscle.
Your shut up muscle?
Your shut up muscle. I love this. People pay me money so I can tell them to shut up. How cool is that? So, what does that mean? Don't be the first person to speak. Be the third or fourth person to speak. And as a micro habit, do that once a day in one meeting, not in every single interaction.
Isn't that what Jeff Bezos is famous for? If I remember correctly, the whole idea, and I realize this is not a culture that you worked in, but you've worked with Amazon executives and managers, I know. The whole idea is to get everything out, for him to hear everything, first through the 6-pager, the PRFAQ, all that stuff that all the Amazon folks know. And then, if I understand correctly, the executives who are leading it and involved in that stuff talk, and then finally, like the Zen master at the end, Bezos would have come in and offered his opinion, and it was kind of it kind of creates a moment.
Yes. I had this interaction with a senior executive who will remain unnamed. And in this event that I ran, there were breakout teams working on various aspects of the business strategy. These people were 2 clicks down from the CEO. This person was an executive vice president, so direct report of the CEO. And I said, let's call them Tom.
Okay.
I said, Tom, your job is not to actually contribute to the strategy. That's the job of the team. Your job is to actually pull your chair away from the table and watch the interaction, help facilitate the conversation if something's getting stuck, or notice what's happening. And at the first break, so 90 minutes into the discussion, Tom comes up to me going, I'm gobsmacked. And I said, oh yeah, what happened? This is a really good team? It's a great juicy topic? He's like, no, I'm just stuck by how blind I have been for 20 years. What do you mean? He said, for 20 years, I've been paying attention to the content that people put in front of my nose. And I've never stepped back like I've done in these last 90 minutes, where you told me to shut up, essentially, and watch what's not being said, but is being said so loudly. It was so educational to notice the dynamics in the room, who's speaking when, who's speaking more than their fair share, what happens when this person speaks and brings up an idea, what happens when this other person speaks. There is a veritable party going on here that I've missed out on, and all this data I've missed out on because I have literally been paying attention to the words in front of me and not all the interactions that go on in the room. Now, interestingly, I imagine that Tom and most of us do pay attention to that on our way up the chain because we want to be mindful of what people above us are thinking and doing. Every little twitch of their eyebrow we're paying attention to. But when we get senior enough, we stop noticing that.
It's interesting because it actually relates directly to a technique that you learn as a beginning journalist. And it's one that I have to remind myself of a lot. And that is how silence will sometimes get the best response because there's awkward silence and the person on the other side of the interview feels like they have to break it.
Yes. And like you, when I went through media training, I was told journalists will use that silence technique on you, Sabina, and you match it with silence or do a bridge to something else. In fact, just yesterday, a friend was saying they were crossing a border and by car, and the border guard asked them some question. They answered it in one sentence, and they put a full stop at the end of the sentence, and the border guard just sat there looking at him. And he's like, I've been through borders many times. I'm not going to give you any more information than what you asked me for.
Oh, and the gun in my bag.
Yes, that too. Yeah, right. So that he matched the silence with silence, and finally the border guard said, okay, have a nice day.
Yeah, 2 Zen masters there.
Yes, 2 Zen masters there for sure.
Very interesting. Now I'm tempted to just be quiet. So there are a number of other tips and tricks in the book. One of them I actually have tried in the past and again need to remind myself to do. And is it called margin notes?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. So another way that we get in the way of listening is when our own ideas pop to mind. And now we're excited to share it. B, we're worried we're going to forget it. Margin notes are where you're taking notes in the body of your note-taking device or piece of paper, create a thick margin on the side. And in that margin, jot down all these ideas you might have. That reduces your anxiety of, I'm going to forget it. It also does something great. It makes you and others look smarter. Here's how. Let's say you have 5 things in your margin notes, and over the course of the next 20 minutes, 3 of those are mentioned by someone else. Great. Let them have their moment in the sun. This is that abundance mindset we were talking about. They feel good that they popped out those 3 ideas. You've got 2 more in your margin notes that you can now contribute in a unique fashion. So the entire conversation improves because everybody feels they contributed and brought unique ideas to the table.
I took it as well to mean that you're able to allow the person to speak and as the manager or the executive, not interrupt them as they're speaking because you don't feel like you have to jump in and make your point at that moment. You're going to remember it.
Exactly.
And the AI note-taking devices are actually really good in that way as well.
Right.
I've found because you have the assurance that, oh, this is being captured and I might be recording something going on in my own mind on in my notes, but at the same time, the AI is there to help as well.
Exactly. So AI is there to help with the note-taking of what is actually going on. And now my margin notes may be just my only notes, which are the things that cause me to go ahead and interrupt or at least leave the conversation. I'm not fully present. And I'm someone who practices radical presence when I'm with somebody. And it really makes things go so much faster. It really boosts the relationship. And we get better ideas as a result because we're fully present. And we're not distracted with these ideas in the margin.
Okay, there's another idea that is conveyed in the book. And despite the name, it has nothing to do with Taylor Swift. It's called blank space. So let's talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking this week about the book, You're the Boss, with the author, Sabina Nawaz. She's an executive coach and former Microsoft leader. And Sabina, I have to tell you, of all the techniques in the book, this is the one that could have helped me most when I was a day-to-day manager. And frankly, is one that I really still need to work on today. You're candid in the book. And so this is my... I always struggle with the pronunciation of the word, the amygdala. Is that how you say it?
Amygdala, yes.
Amygdala.
Yes.
I think mine might be 30 times the size of everybody else's. Because when I'm under pressure, that was the other thing that resonated with me. When I'm under pressure, I am not always a nice person. And my mother, who is listening to this, because she always listens to the podcast, will vouch for that.
Oh. She on the receiving end of that not niceness, Todd?
Sometimes. As my dad used to say, she's my biggest fan, and I need to be better.
Well, often we're the hardest to those closest to us.
We really are. But tell us about the notion of blank space, because this is the way that you coach people and that you've learned to, one of the ways that you've learned to address this, the issue of pressure.
For sure. When under pressure, actually, let me ask you this. When you're under extraordinary pressure, what is your tendency? Is it to take blank space?
No.
Right.
No.
What do you do instead, Todd?
I yell.
You yell. Yeah. What else do you do with your to-do list or your work? What do you tend to do?
I pile on more because then it makes the stuff that I'm actually dealing with in the moment seem smaller.
Right. So we hunker down. We add more things to our to-do list. We even write things and scratch it out just to feel like we've made some progress. We abandon our workouts, time with our loved ones.
Sleep,
eat junk food, all this kind. We do more because we're under this fallacy that if I can work my way out through this tremendous pressure. When under pressure, do nothing. Do nothing. That's the concept of blank space. Okay, so let's break it down. Blank space is 2 hours contiguous in a week, every week, that you unplug. And this is, by the way, during the work week, not on the weekend. Yeah. So it's, yes.
Okay.
Now I'm giving you the fully advanced version. If you have to start on the weekend and you have to start with 2 minutes as a micro habit instead of 2 hours, that's all good.
That's right.
But I'm giving you the full-on deal here.
Fully actualized.
Yes, the fully actualized version, which, by the way, many of the executives I coach who have impossibly busy calendars do on a regular basis. and they've had transformational impact.
Do they put it on their calendars?
They
the 2
put it
hours?
on their calendar 2 hours during the work week. And what do you do during that time?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what you don't do. You are not attached to any device, no reading, no talking, no researching on the web.
No podcasts?
No podcasts, much as we would love to hear yours. None. It is absolutely quiet, unplugged time. Because what does research show? When do our best ideas come out? In the shower, in our commute, during exercise, when we allow our brain some space to rest. Why are we stressed? Why do we take on that pressure and convert it into stress? Because we feel we are stuck. We're in an untenable position. I don't know what to do. I don't have an answer. I'm hosed. All right.
Yes.
So when we give ourselves that quiet space, suddenly, and we've all had this, the answer reveals itself.
Yeah.
It was hiding in plain sight. You are enough. You are enough in those pressure-filled situations, much as your threat response, your amygdala is saying, run, flee, fill up your calendar. You are enough. And if you allow the quiet for the signal to emerge from the noise, it will come out.
How have you experienced this in your own life?
Oh, gosh. So many different ways. One, I hate conflict. Now, I am short-tempered at times, but I hate conflict. And I was just twisted into a pretzel. I actually lose weight, not my preferred weight loss
Right.
method.
Not by running marathons.
Yeah, exactly. I would much rather do it that way. But I was really stuck in this situation with a friend. And I don't know what to do. And I'm just driving myself nuts. I'm driving my poor husband nuts. I'm not sleeping in the middle of the night, waking up with a dry throat. And then it occurred to me, I'm like, blank space, hello, take a dose of your own medicine. So for 2 weeks, I actually unplugged, I think it was like about an hour every other day or so. It wasn't, I don't remember the exact frequency. But as I took that time, first, it was really helpful with stress management because I went out and walked in nature and just being outside in fresh air helped me relieve the pressure of just having my computer on and being in a closed room. And as I started to give myself more space, I started to breathe better. As I started to breathe better, my brain started to think better. And then I had this bolt of insight around this conflict of, oh, here's why this might be difficult for her. It
Empathy.
was a true moment of empathy. And before that, I was so judgy. I was so judgy and I was so self-righteous.
Well, you were right.
Of course I was right? And that's the singular story that I also
Yeah.
talk about. But here's the thing.
Right.
Here's a cue. Here's a tip-off that you might be overdue for some blank space. The more you feel you are absolutely right, the more you feel righteous, the more it might be time to step back and get some perspective.
I promised at the beginning we'd talk a little bit about Bill and Steve. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that was because I think your experience with them, at least as I read in the book, got beyond the caricatures and actually illustrated some of the principles that you're talking about here. Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And I think people know Bill Gates for his ability to just make people wither in meetings, for many years, his catchphrase was, "That's the stupidest effing thing that I ever heard." And of course, people know Steve Ballmer from the caricature on stage. And I just want to say my experience with Steve Ballmer is just how much he cares about the individuals around him, to the point that it's almost a little surprising that he knows what's going on generally, with you. He, like, if I've ever sat down with him for an interview, one of the first things he asks is, "How's GeekWire going? How's the business going?" To the point where I didn't know what to say the first time he asked that.
You weren't expecting that.
No. So empathy and listening. And then with Gates, you tell the story in the book of how both Gates and Ballmer really were of the abundance mindset when it came to succession planning for executives at Microsoft, which is something you were directly involved in. Tell us about that.
It was an amazing experience working with Bill and Steve. I came into executive development from a rather non-traditional career path. I jumped straight from running products to running management, executive leadership development for, I think we had 11,000 managers in the company at the time. And I didn't know what I was doing in terms of formal professional development. My first teachers were Bill and Steve, because very soon into the job, I was thrown into meetings with them. And there was just this expectation that, of course, I knew what I was doing and what are we going to do for our succession planning process? And what are we going to do for our executive retreat this year? What are we going to do for this program here? And so I had to do a lot of learning on the fly and learning from them in terms of watching them in action. Whenever somebody reaches celebrity status, we tend to, of course, have caricatures. We also tend to think in binaries. And I speak to this in the book too, one of the myths, that there is no such thing, for the most part, as a purely good or a purely bad manager.
Right.
They reside in us. We're all human. Just like there are very few purely good or purely bad human beings. We have them both. Like some days to your mom, you're probably a wonderful son.
Hopefully more often than not.
Right? Exactly. And some days she's thinking, which side of the bed did he get up?
Right. And what kind of kid did I raise?
Right. And if we just have that experience of you in that snapshot, we make up a story, and then that story becomes lore and legend. Bill and Steve are human beings, just like anyone else. And it was a tremendous privilege. The thing that most stood out for me that was common to both of them was an intense curiosity. So it doesn't surprise me that Steve was asking you about GeekWire, Todd. He probably also knows about your relationship with your mother and how many siblings you have and what your favorite color is.
I don't think he goes that deep.
Okay. But he does have a tremendous curiosity about those things and a fantastic memory. And I share the story of the umlauts in my book, in the opening chapter, where Steve went, I think this guy's name has an umlaut in it, and your name tag doesn't show the umlaut. And I'm like, no, Steve, it doesn't. Yes, I think it does. But what was really important for Steve is that we get the name exactly right. That respect, that care for people. And similarly for Bill, his level of curiosity was insatiable. He could so focus on a topic and go deep into it because he was really curious about, well, what about this? And then what? And then what? And then what? Let's keep going as deep as we can. And he could go deeper than any expert. So that level of curiosity combined with care, whether it was care about an individual, care about a team, or care about the product and the customer. That was my experience working with them.
And in the executive succession planning too, one of the points you make in the book is that abundance mindset came out in that they were thrilled when somebody working underneath them showed the promise to become a top executive leader at the company. It wasn't a threat to them. And of course, in a position like that, maybe it's a little different. You're not seeing things as threats, not somebody who's going to be coming in and taking your job. And you'd welcome somebody who was good enough to take your job.
Yeah. I remember being in the room when folks who got to the C-suite were fairly junior and were identified in these succession planning discussions as people having high potential, and how thrilled and excited they were. And these people have gone on to have massive careers.
Sabina, as we wrap up our conversation here, what would be your key takeaways, especially at this moment in time, for people out there who are either experienced managers navigating this new world that we're in, or people who've been individual contributors who are just becoming managers, starting their own companies? Are there kind of words of wisdom that you would offer to them in some?
At this moment in time where pressure is at an all-time high, uncertainty is at an all-time high, at least that's what we think. Who knows what it was like 100 years ago?
Sure.
It is especially important to know when you're under pressure and how you're reacting to it. Are you getting, as I said, defined by pressure, or are you getting refined by pressure? Are you the coal or the diamond? And if you think about Newton's laws of motion, every action has a reaction. Every action under pressure has a reaction. Not yours, but the people who work on your team. Do you know what that reaction is? Because power is a broken volume knob. It distorts. Everything that's sent upward is milder than what they're experiencing, and it's cushioned in praise. So it's really hard to know. So do you know how your actions, what reactions they're creating, and therefore what is the impact of that on their productivity, their well-being, and ultimately your business results?
That's really good. The book is You're the Boss, and it's by Sabina Nawaz, who's my guest here today, who made the trip in to meet with us here in person. It's always better to talk in person for these kinds of conversations. So, Sabina, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Todd.
Kurt Milton edited this episode. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.